Today, we're really going to talk about weight loss because it's an important topic. It's one that's actually become an epidemic. I remember when I first heard that, I just thought, like, how can you turn weight loss into a disease? Like, it didn't sound to me anything like what I knew of when I considered what disease really looked like. To me, disease was a germ or contact with a contagion. You were in an environment where other people were sick and then you became sick. Those things made sense to me. But then throwing something like becoming overweight or obese into the category of infectious disease just didn't seem to ring true to me in any way, shape, or form. So, how could you call being overweight or obese a disease? So, we're going to kind of crack that code today, or we're going to try. I'm not sure we're going to actually accomplish it because this is work that is ongoing and really, really hot in the world of medicine right now. It is a big topic and one that is not necessarily easy to pull apart. But for those of you who may be on a quest for a really healthy weight for yourself, like I was over a year ago, and it wasn't easy to kind of figure out what it was that I needed. I'm not even sure that I've completely figured it out, but I do feel like I'm on the right path. To date, I've lost 22 pounds. I feel like my hormones are balancing, my sleep is getting better. I just feel like a more normal person. And if you find that some of the aspects of your life are out of sync, maybe you have gained weight, maybe your hormones are out of balance, maybe you're not happy with your skin and the way it looks, maybe you fall into sickness very easily. It becomes something that you're used to over and over again. Maybe you have a lot of stress in your life that you don't manage well. All of those things you really want to put into alignment so that you have a very healthy and happy health span, we call it, right? We talked a lot about lifespan this year and how to have a long life, but you want to be healthy within that life. So let's get into our chapter that we started last week. I stopped it last week when we were talking about a virus that could potentially be the reason why you are not able to lose weight. And this research comes out of work that has been done by an Indian physician named Nikhil Dhurandhar. His work is fascinating. He discovered that a chicken virus was making a group of chickens overweight, in fact, obese, and that another group of chickens that did not contract the virus did not gain weight. They remained skinny. And so he started to put a correlation between, could it be that people who are obese also may be suffering from an infectious virus? And if so, what would that lead to? Would that lead to some type of medication or a vaccine or possible other antidote? One of the things we're diving into in this book, 10% Human by Aliana Collin, is the concept of what does your gut microbiome play? What role does it play in your overall health? And today we're actually kind of taking a look at what role it plays in the amount of weight you carry and how your body functions. So I want to go to the end of where we were last week. We were talking about, we were ending on the end of page 58. I know we're going slowly, but I think there's so much in here to talk about. So here's some statistics I think that are really important. I jotted them down on some notes, so forgive me as I read them, but here we go. All right. 1 in every 3 adults in the world is overweight. Okay, so just sit with that statistic for a minute. So this is a global issue. All right. Before 1960, we didn't have this problem in the world. What is it that changed in 1960 and over the last 50 years? What is it that's changing that is causing this like really epidemic of obesity? 1 in 9 are obese. Okay, so I want you to look today, if you can, at your height, your waist size, and then look up online, if you can, where you fall. Are you in normal range? Are you underweight? Are you overweight? Or are you obese? Because I think it's not so much that it's important for us to know, what label we have, because you don't own that label. It just kind of gives you a starting point for where you are and where you want to go. The only way we know we're healthy is if we get a checkup. So the only way we know that we're actually the appropriate weight is after we start to measure this and take a look at what falls within the healthy range. Now, I think one of the challenges of the world becoming larger as this epidemic increases is that our view of what is overweight and what is not overweight becomes skewed. And so we don't want to go back to a mindset of, this emaciated body and that's what's beautiful and these super skinny models. I think all of that came out really around the 60s and the 70s did a lot of damage to people in general and women especially young girls when it came to body image. And we also saw the rise of things like anorexia. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about having a normal view of what a healthy human body should look like. And science and medicine has given us some really good parameters. And I'm going to give you an example of those parameters. When I look at my own weight range, my healthy weight range for my height actually fluctuates considerably. I think it's it's a 30-pound range. So if you think of what does 30 pounds look like? 30 pounds would look like, 6 bags of flour. That's a lot of weight. If you were coming home from the grocery store with 6 bags of flour, you would have a significant amount of weight. And the reason I bring that up is that it is not a small range that we're talking about when we talk about healthy. There are certain people that carry more muscle. There's certain people who are bigger boned. Genetically, we're different. So science and medicine gives us these really good ranges. So don't feel like you're pigeonholed into a very tiny number. You're not. Okay, so that's point number one. But I think it's important for all of us to know exactly where we fall there. Number two, I want to draw your attention to the fact that science has debunked something that I think is really, really hard for us to understand. I know it's hard for me to understand, and that is it's not as simple as calories in, calories out, exercise put in, and exercise out. So let's take a minute to pull that apart for a second. We do know that if you stopped eating, you would go into ketosis, which means you would start burning your fat eventually. And depending on the person, it can be as soon as 24 hours, or it can take as long as 3 days before you start going into your fat stores, depending on how much glucose is in your blood and how efficient your body is switching between glucose burning and burning ketones. But in any rate, we do know, as a matter of fact, that if you were to stop eating, right, your body would have to look for an alternative energy source. And why is that? Because we are built for starvation. We're not built for abundance. And that's something that is really important, I think, for us to keep in mind, that our body doesn't have a mechanism for too much. It has a mechanism of support for too little. Why is that? Because we were designed to hunt and gather our food. And that takes time, and that depends on nature. It also depends on weather and other factors. So if your body wasn't prepared to go long periods of time without eating, a lot of people would die. So your body is designed to have these relatively, what I think in the modern world we would consider to be long periods of time of not eating, and we are perfectly fine at managing that. Now, for those of us who might be diabetic or insulin resistant, this can be a very dangerous proposition, because your insulin is not working the way it's supposed to. And what happens is, if you're insulin resistant, those periods of time when you're not eating could actually cause you some significant health problems. So I am not in any way, shape, or form recommending long periods of fasting as an antidote to weight gain. What I am saying is, you want your body to be metabolically flexible, which means you want to work up to increasing the amount of time in between meals as much as possible. Some people recommend no more than a 12-hour window of eating, which means that, say, for example, you had your first meal at 7 o'clock in the morning, you would make sure that you completed your last bite by 7 p.m. That's a pretty standard understanding within the scientific community. And if you can shrink that eating window, it is being demonstrated that, and certainly anecdotally, that people are finding they have more energy, that their weight is coming back into normal range, that they feel like their hormones are balanced, they sleep better, and they manage stress much better. So if you can shrink that window even to 8 hours, and some people recommend 6 hours, what it does is it gives your body more time to not digest food and more time to strengthen and repair itself. So I think overall, we can all agree that in the path to finding our ideal weight and our ideal health, it is best if we do not spend our entire day eating, unless, of course, we have a medical condition that makes it impossible for our body to go long periods without eating. So please consult your physician and ask them, how do you get on a path to being metabolically flexible? That's the term that we're using right now. And that just means that you can go longer periods of time without eating. And you can also eat at different periods of time. Now, we have talked on this show about our circadian rhythm and the beautiful sunlight. Another guideline that you can use, if this works better for you, is for you to eat only when the sun is out, which means that in the summertime, you get a longer period to eat. And in the wintertime, it's going to be shorter, sort of a hibernation period of the season. Remember, we do live in seasons, and following the seasons and the natural rhythm of nature is actually going to be more beneficial for your body than if you try to stick to some strict regimen that is based on, your modern lifestyle filled with lights or I should say artificial light, computers, cell phones, and other things that keep us awake and keep light in our eyes far too long. So again, point number one that I just want to make is that it isn't just about calories in and calories out. It's about when you eat and how metabolically flexible you are. Point number two I want to make, and she makes in the book, talks about genetics. So let's get down to the actual facts when it comes to genetics and weight gain. What role do your genetics play? Now, I was in a human clinical trial recently for a weight loss system, and within that system, our blood was taken and our genetic patterns, our genetic test was taken. And what I found out is that I do have a couple of genes I'm not super happy about. One makes me predisposed to diabetes, and one makes me predisposed to weight gain. Both of those I wasn't thrilled to have. But then I read her book and I was a little bit more relieved, and I will share why. Here are the facts. The facts are that there are 32 genes of our 21,000 gene genome that play a role in weight gain. So when you think about it, 32 out of 21,000 really isn't significant at all. And when we play out that math and we take, let's say, for example, you had all 32 of the genes that play into weight gain. I only have 2, but if you had the 32, you would only be 10% more likely to become obese than someone without all 32. And if you have less than that, the percentages go down. I'm actually 1% more likely to be obese than someone who does not have the 2 genes that I have. And even in that circumstance, you are only going to differ between your non-genetic containing friend by 17 pounds. So when we look at obesity rates in the United States and in the world in general, what we see is that we're not talking about a 17-pound difference. In most cases, we're talking about a 1 to 200 pound different. So at the end of the day, that isn't the reason why people become overweight or obese. So just again, it is not your DNA, and it is not necessarily the number of calories you're eating or the amount of exercise you're doing or not doing. Those are the things that have become abundantly clear. The question mark out there is, could you have a virus that is predisposing you to gaining weight? And that is something that is currently on the table right now. It hasn't been definitively classified, but it seems that we might be moving in that direction. All right. So what other things do we know? We know that people talk about having slow metabolisms. So one of the things that surprised me once I got a smart scale, and I highly recommend that you get a smart scale at the beginning of your weight loss journey. I don't use it very much anymore. I think the last time I weighed myself was in April. Now we are coming into September, so I'll probably jump on that scale in October again. You know, maybe I'll just follow the quarters of the tech season and jump on the scale just to see where I am. But here's something that's kind of cool when you think about it and you start to measure everything on a smart scale. And that is that you get something called your basal metabolic rate. Now, your basal metabolic rate tells you how many calories you need to actually keep your body going at the weight that it is. And what shocked me was that when my weight was higher, my metabolic rate was higher. And when my weight went down, my metabolic rate went down. So what does that mean? It means that there is this misconception that skinny people have faster metabolisms. That would mean that they have more energy burning to keep their bodies going than those people who are overweight. That somehow, if you're in a large body, your body is moving with very, very slow momentum and with very minimal energy. And actually, it's the opposite. If you're a bigger body, it takes more energy to run your body, which makes total sense to me, than if you're in a smaller body, it would take less energy. So the three myths that we've gotten rid of today so far, again, are number one, it's not as simple as calories in, calories out, exercise in, or sitting on the couch. Number two, it isn't your DNA, because your DNA only has a factor of less than 10% in your in your chances of becoming obese. And at that, you'd have to have all 32 genes, and we know most people don't. So we can take that off the table. And thirdly, it isn't about people having faster metabolisms or slower metabolisms, which we're now remembering is not called metabolism, it's called your basal metabolic rate. And that rate is not faster for skinny people, it's actually slower. So three myths right there. And if we take those off the table, how we act and how we eat and how we live should become a little bit different. All right, continuing on and kind of breaking this down. There is an example that she gives that talks about where IBS may come from. Now, one of the things that surprised me when I met people who had IBS is that some of them were either very thin or really obese. And I didn't quite understand how you could be obese if everything you ate was running through you. Where would you be gaining weight from if all the food you were eating actually wasn't being absorbed by your body? And of course, we're starting to learn now something that's absolutely radical in my view, and that is that people who have leaky guts or irritable bowel syndrome, that they are actually not able to absorb nutrients and they're not able to utilize energy because they have a lack of microbes in their gut that are there to do that particular work. So I'm going to step back from the chapter a little bit. I'm going to encourage you to read at least through page 62, 63. Yeah, I would keep going. I would try to get all the way. We're probably going to get, let's see, we've got about 10 minutes. We can probably get through a good portion of this, but try to read, let's say, to page 70 for next week. But one of the things that I want to draw your attention to with the IBS is a potential origin for it. So there was a case that she brings up in Walkerton, Canada, where there was this massive rainstorm and one of their wells had a breach. And in that breach, it allowed the farmland surrounding the town, that the manure that was used as fertilizer, to actually flow into the clean drinking water source. That brought in something called E. coli, which we know leads people to having gastritis and upset stomach, diarrhea, vomiting, kind of that kind of stomach flu situation. So what happened was that after that was fixed, right, and they fixed it right away, which was a great thing, they noticed that even 2 years later, there were people with IBS that had emerged, and not just a few, but a significant number. And they also noticed that half of the population got sick to begin with. And 8 years later, even half of those people who were sick 2 years later were still sick. And so what role was E. coli playing in their body, and why was it that they weren't able to rid themselves of the E. coli? What they're suggesting is that these microbes that we have in our body to combat the E. coli may be deficient in this population of people, which I think is absolutely the case. Each and everything we do, each and everything we breathe, each and everything we touch, each and everything that we eat affects our gut microbiome. Remember, 90% of who we are is this microbiology, and 10% of who we are is human biology. And so to ignore the 90% is actually to ignore maybe what is the most key aspect of our health. And so the suggestion is, if you can actually increase certain bacteria in your body, you can reverse some of these, what they call dysbiosis, right? This lack of good microbiology, and turn it around. Now, I want to go to a specific example because I think it really does show something. Sometimes when you have a small population and it's isolated, unfortunately, it can be a really, really good way to demonstrate what might be going on in a bigger population with more variables. And so I want to take us to the island of Nauru. And the island of Nauru is in the South Pacific. And in fact, many South Pacific Islanders are obese. This happens to be the population in the world which actually has the highest rate of obesity. And why is that? So if you take a little bit of a deep dive into their history, what you find is that in 1906, phosphate was discovered on this island. And when it was discovered, the Europeans came and decided they were going to take over the island and mine it. Now, the native habitat, or the native inhabitants of this island, lived off of a diet of natural root vegetables, fish from the ocean, coconuts, local fruits. That was their diet. What we know about the gut microbiome is that your microbiome is designed to interact with the environment and the foods that you eat. So if you, for example, go on a vacation and you're used to eating a certain group of foods, you go to another place in the world and you start eating things that your body knows nothing about, you may not have the microbiome to actually get that energy, get that food supply out of the food that you're eating, and you can get traveler's diarrhea. It's not that those places are dirty, which is why I think a lot of people thought, as long as we clean we wash our hands, and we are clean about the hotels we stay in, and we're careful about the water we drink, that all of that will play into safe travel. And I'm not saying that, hand washing isn't a good practice, but it seems that there's actually a greater correlation between people eating foods that their gut is unfamiliar with and not having the microbiome that you need to actually take care of that gut than it is that you're running into dangerous microbes that your body is actually falling sick to. So how do we build that up? There's kind of a couple of ways for us to do that, but I'm going to put that kind of off to the side for a minute and go back to the story of Nauvoo. So the people of Nauvoo, because they were colonized and because they were stripped of their natural surrounding and the phosphate was taken out of the country, they lost the ability, because phosphate is a natural fertilizer, to actually grow the things that naturally grew in that area, in that island. And so there's a small strip of land which is inhabited by the 11,000 inhabitants of the country. And when the country was turned over to them, they too kept mining the phosphate to bring in lots of riches. And at one point, it was the wealthiest country in the world because of the phosphate resources. But now all of that is gone. So not only is all the phosphate gone, but also the natural plants and the fish is also has been affected. So the food that they grew up on, that their ancestors ate, that they were used to eating, is gone, and everything is now imported from the West, and it's all highly processed and highly packaged. In fact, there are foods that are eaten there apparently that aren't even sold in Western countries. And so their diet is a very poor diet. It's not aligned to their microbiome, and it's filled with preservatives. So is it any wonder, if you take all of that into consideration, that it has become the most obese country in the world? And it probably follows suit that several other islands in the South Pacific are the same, that they have undergone the same type of stripping of resources, changing of local diet, and imported this very highly processed, highly chemical laden Western diet and very, very low quality foods. And this has become a health epidemic in that country, in that region of the world, and of course, we know throughout the world. And so I'm going to leave you with a suggestion for this week. I want you to go through your cabinets, and I want you to look at everything that has maybe more than 5 or 6 ingredients, anything that has chemical names that you don't understand. Now, some natural foods do use their Latin names on labels, so you may want to do some sleuthing and actually Google some of these ingredients. One of the websites I always recommend is ewg.org, which is the Environmental Working Group. They do a lot of work on what is safe and what is not safe when it comes to food and personal care additives. So I would definitely take a look at that. But if you don't want to go through the hassle of looking up all the ingredients and all the boxed foods that you have in your house, you may just want to do a clean sweep. You may just want to go through, and by the way, just because you bought it in a healthier, natural store, if it's in a box, if it's in a can, if it's in a bag, if it's shelf stable in the middle of the store, something had to be done so that it doesn't break down, especially if it has a super long shelf life. So you want to eat from the perimeter of the grocery store, try to buy local, try to buy seasonal, get rid of some of those things that have multiple chemical names. And if you're going to eat out, try to eat foods that you feel are minimally processed, right? That you're not, anytime you eat out, you're probably opening yourself up to seed oils and other things that are lower quality, mass produced, and not great for your health. Even if it's in the most expensive of restaurants, you can eat in smaller restaurants, farm to table restaurants, local restaurants where you know the ingredients. But be mindful and kind of use the 90-10 rule, right? 90% of the time that you eat, try to make it from foods that are whole foods that you cook yourself. And 10% of the time is when you indulge in some of those, convenience foods if you need to, or going out to eat, enjoying friends and family in a restaurant. I think that makes your life a little bit balanced. It's not so severe and it's still within a modern lifestyle. I hope those suggestions are helpful. We're going to keep going on. We have one more section of this chapter I want to talk about, and that is the bacteria that she recommends you start introducing into your gut if you have any of those issues. We're just going to break those down really quickly. And then we're going to go on to the third chapter, which is about your mind and what role your mind plays when it comes to your health and your gut. Remember, there is a gut-brain axis that is a dual pathway. So the mind goes to the gut goes to the mind. One doesn't rule over the other one. Fascinating science. I hope you'll all join me next week. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. I'll see you. Bye-bye.